Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in the Adelaida District in Paso Robles with Kevin Jussila. Haha, I said it correctly, of Kukkula. How am I doing?
Perfect.
Well, great. These are Finnish names, so it's a little challenging.
Most of them, not all of them.
Not all of them, not all. But Kevin, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us a little bit about Kukkula and where we are.
Yeah, so we're in the Adelaida District, one of the 11 sub-appellations in Paso Robles. We're in the area that's kind of known as the far out wineries. We're the furthest northwest corner, and the only winery that goes past us, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, actually, technically there's two. It's DeBost, but Justin, most notably, they're another 2.5 miles west of us. So we're pretty far west and north as in terms of the overall Paso appellation. And anyway, what do you want me to tell you about Kukkula? Just kind of the bullet points.
The bullet points. Give me a quick, what is the name Kukkula?
Kukkula is Finnish. My family's from Finland. It's my first language. And Kukkula in Finnish is actually said kukkula.
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 There you go. So Kukkula means the high place. So in Finnish I would say minun talo on kukkulalla. My house is on a high place. And when you came in, if you saw the house up high, that's kind of, we vacillated for about 5 months, about what we were going to call this. And after going back and forth with a whole bunch of things, one day I asked my mom, because I just wasn't getting anywhere. And so she asked what I was looking for, and I kind of told her, well, I was thinking Meki as a mountain, and I gave her some other alternatives. She said, well, how about Kukkula? And I had never even, interestingly enough, I had never heard the word. And it just resonated immediately, because it's such a fun word, Kukkula for Americans or whatever, but it's a fun word, and it says a lot about how steep and high these properties are here. So anyway, we're Rhone-centric organic dry farmers, what we do, 100% estate grown. My first love of wines was Southern Rhone wines when I was in my 20s.
You're jumping ahead of me there.
Oh, okay. I'm jumping ahead of me. Stop. Well, I wasn't sure what the bullet points were. But I'm the owner winemaker at Kukkula, and we're very focused on Rhone-centric blends.
And how many acres do you have here?
So the property here is 80 acres. And yet I farm 2 properties. The other is 72 acres. Between the two, we've gone through some huge changes because of red blotch, but we had originally planted 50 acres of vines across the 2 properties. We've torn everything out and we've replanted, and at this point we're only at 42. We might stop there. So we're farming 42 acres across 2 properties. I also farm olives and walnuts on this property as well.
Wow. And you said that you're doing Rhone varieties, although I know you also do a little Cabernet, so there's some Bordeaux varieties in there too. And how many cases do you produce a year?
Well, that's kind of a moving number. We were pushing close to 3,000 cases a year or two ago. We are pulling back. The markets are soft, so I'm not quite sure what that number is. It's going to be in the 2,000 plus zone. The vintage you're having today is close to 3,000 cases. So.
Okay. So a little fluctuation. And is your wine exclusively direct to consumer, or are you in any markets? I hope you're in Finland.
Oh, it's so funny you say that. We are in Finland, although the Finnish market, if you think the U.S. market is bad right now, the Finnish market is not good. Excuse the phone, I'm sorry. I wish I could disconnect that. So we are in in Finland. I'm a really proud Finn, and of course I had to have my wines in Finland. I had an opportunity 5-6 years ago to have the wines there. That is our only place for distribution. We are 100% direct to consumer in the United States, heavily club driven.
Wow. Okay, now I'm going to ask you, what was your first memory relevant to wine?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. I mean, I'm 64 years old, so my first memory relative to wine would have probably been in my teens. Something like Annie Greensprings, Annie Bunny. Oh gosh, I don't know. Those old kind of jug wines that my parents would have had in their kitchen. That was my first memory of. So there's 2 others real quickly. I think on the first time I was probably not carded, it was illegal. I had ordered a bottle of Sebastiani Cabernet Sauvignon at a restaurant trying to impress a girl I was dating. I knew nothing about wine.
Before you were 21?
Probably before. I think it was before I was 21. Somehow it happened. But my first seminal experience, interestingly enough, was Beaucastel in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
So yes, my next question, as you've sort of jumped ahead on, is what is that first, aha moment wine? Was it that Beaucastel, or is there another memory that kind of, I'm sure you've had a few, because obviously you decided to then buy a winery and start a winery. But what was one of those wines that was kind of an aha moment for you, and what was it and why?
It's hard to say what wine, but clearly, so what had happened was I started getting really curious about wines, and I got curious about wines really because of other interests, hobbies. Real quickly, I was a pretty serious cyclist and runner for many years, and when I met my wife, Paula, I was really seriously into running and biking to the point that it really dominated a lot of my time. And so I was trying to figure out how do I incorporate my wife into this, because I didn't want to give that up. And so this kind of evolved over time into bike riding, and specifically doing bike tours, which kind of evolved to wine bike tours.
So this is how you got her to bike ride.
I got her to bike ride with another incentive, kind of a resorty way to bike ride, instead of kind of me doing centuries or more, which she had zero interest in. And so what happened was the San Ynez Valley was probably kind of my first real serious foray into consuming wines and getting curious about wines. And as you know, although it's very, very diversified there's a lot of Rhone, either varietals. Probably back then it was more varietally driven, not so much blend driven. So that was probably my first foray into wines. But what really I think was the catalyst that got me going was we lived in Topanga Canyon, which is in the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles. And there was an amazing wine shop. It's still an amazing wine shop called the Woodland Hills Wine Company on Ventura near Fallbrook in the valley. And somehow I had fallen into going there. I guess I was looking for good wine shops, and I fell upon this amazing wine shop. Their knowledge there was, and probably to this day, is really amazing. They've got amazing
Absolutely.
staff.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a shy guy. I was asking all kinds of questions, and I got Wine Spectator, and I would circle all the wines I was curious about. I'd go in there and go, oh, here he goes with his Wine Spectator stuff again. And so somehow, I guess what I was asking questions about kind of moved to Rhones as a suggestion, and so I started kind of focusing on Rhones. And I don't know, there might have been things like Rayas or Vieux Telegraphe, or certainly Beaucastel, or it's too long ago to remember anymore. That's pushing certainly 35 to 40 years ago. But I remember Beaucastel maybe over time kind of really resonating with me. And I ultimately had an amazing experience in 1995 there, where I tasted with one of the patriarchs by chance. I had knocked on their door, and you're not supposed to do that.
And they let you taste. They didn't kick you away.
He actually had me come back a couple days later. And we ended up having this amazing tasting experience. And so that really, we actually tasted with Rayas as well at the same time, Vieux Telegraphe and a few others I forget. But that was kind of really when I started, I guess I was sucked into the vortex.
Yeah, the vortex happens. Yes. So I'm curious, do you, you make a lot of blends.
Yeah.
In fact, you make almost exclusively blends, Rhone blends. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No.
No?
No. I mean, look, I suppose when I first fell in love with wines, I told you I loved Rhones, and Rhones are essentially blended wines, right? Unless you're a northern wine, it's 100% or damn close to 100% Syrah. So, yeah, I mean, I've had amazing examples of Syrahs that I've had in the past, and Grenache, Spanish garnachas, and things like that I just completely love. But I am a huge foodie. My wife is a huge foodie. And so for us, I think what makes food so amazing is the ingredients, the components that go into it. And then I think by extension, the same thing happens with wine. Each varietal brings a certain mouthfeel, aromatic, weight, whatever. They deliver differently on the palate. And so I think blending is really kind of creating, in my mind, more complex wines.
So if we were to come to your home up the hill from your tasting room, if we were to walk in there, what wines would we find in there? Is it a lot of the kukkula wines? Do you drink a lot of local wines, international? Is it all blends?
All of the above. Yeah, I mean, look, you can certainly have, it's got to have a healthy dose of kukkula allocation in my cellar. But yeah, I have a pretty big representation of Central Coast wines, a pretty big representation. In fact, I have one whole wall of California wines, including kukkula.
Mostly Rhone producers or other varieties?
No, not necessarily. I mean, clearly there's, I'm getting too many names here, but, certainly a lot of the names that we know here in Paso, in the San Ynez area, but, up to Oregon and Washington, certainly a bias to the Rhones. But, a good friend of mine here is a project called 6 Mile Bridge, and they're all about Bordeaux's. His name is Jim Maroney, by the way. So I have a healthy amount of 6 Mile Bridge as an example. Pinots, a talisman, a good friend, and an amazing winemaker up in Northern California, the Sonoma area. Scott Rich, so I have a lot of Pinots. But yeah, so there's some varietal specific, but yeah, if you took inventory of all the wines in my cellar, I suspect you'll probably find, 70-80% of them are blends.
Is there anything you opened up recently that drank really well?
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, I had some friends over, a fellow winemaker, for dinner a few nights ago, and we had a Chateau Quinault from Bordeaux, 2003. It's a Saint-Emilion wine, and that was really an amazing experience. I'm really big on older vintage wines, and so I really love to buy wines and put them away for a whole number of years, so that was really cool. Gosh, I don't know. I have a bottle of wine every night, so it kind of blurs after a while.
Hard to keep up. But it's nice when you have a selection, and if you're keeping older wines, you just go down there and see what you think might be ready to drink now.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you were saying that when you went into Woodland Hills Wine Company to buy wines, you walked in with your wine spectator, circling them. I'm going to guess that you...
I don't do that, by the way, anymore.
No, now you have a palate, I get that. But I'm curious because at that time, I'm sure what you were circling were things that got some pretty good scores. Okay. So as a winemaker now, what is your opinion on wine critics and scores? I mean, obviously that was...
You're putting me in the boiling water here.
Well, I mean, it was clearly a very important thing as a consumer, and I see the value, and look where you are today. Maybe it's a dangerous road to go down, but...
I submit to most of the wine critics, and I think that anybody who's in the end of the business that I'm in, which is direct-to-consumer, really kind of wines of distinction. We do submit and rely on, critics treating us favorably, and to a large degree, I get a lot of pretty good recognition from them. I will say that, this is where it gets ripe with danger. Certain wine critics, and especially historically, and it's sort of evolving, I think, today, have different palates, but there's been kind of a defined palate, the Robert Parker palate as an example, kind of big extracted wines. And don't get me wrong, I love those wines. I have those wines in my cellar. But I'm all about finesse and elegance. I'm kind of more into the little lower alcohol. I'm just non-interventionist wines, complexity, high acid. How does it complement food? And so a lot of times, although those wines might do well with critics, they don't necessarily do as well as I think that they should. And I do see, again, that that's evolving. And I think I certainly see it with respect to how we're being treated with our wines. You kind of have to play the game, and I think that over time, that conversation evolves.
Yeah. And obviously, like you said, you're not driven by scores anymore in your buying. So, you find your place, and now you have the confidence, and you know what you like, and you know how to find it. So talking about what you like as a consumer, you have a vast selection of wines in your cellar, as you've described. You make red wines exclusively. I know you said you had a white wine, but currently are only making red wine. As a wine drinker, red, white, or rosé?
All of the above. Yeah, if you're really into food and wine with food, it has to be all of the above. And it isn't that I don't have Valia, my only white, that I haven't made in a few years in my cellar. I do have other whites in the cellar. And, that runs the gamuts from, kind of German Rieslings to, whatever, Chardonnay, typically French Chardonnays or Sauvignon Blancs or, it's all over the map.
A nice equal opportunist. What about if you had to choose still or sparkling?
I'm a big still guy. I have a fair amount of sparkling in the cellar. I don't know. We just don't pull out as much sparkling as we used to. I don't know why. It just has happened that way.
I'm really curious to go into your cellar. That sounds like a very vast, exciting place to wander through.
It's not too bad. It's a pretty good place. I like hanging out there.
So you said that you like to, you and your wife like to cook, that you like to pair wine with food. So how do you approach pairing wine and food? Do you follow rules? Are there rules you can share, guidelines that you use, or do you just sort of, I got that 2003 Saint-Emilion and I'm ready to drink it, so let's just open it with whatever?
Well, I definitely don't do that. Although it's funny that Saint-Emilion, I did, in fact, it was a bit of a violation of what I would have typically paired with the meal. Although that's not really fair. So our guests are vegetarians, and my wife and I have been leaning vegetarian for a while now. We're not 100%. I love meat. I'm a carnivore. But she's got a nice repertoire of dinners that she prepares that are vegetarian. So she did it for our guests. And it was a gnocchi. I can't remember what it was with the gnocchi. It's funny, all of a sudden I'm zoning. But she did this new thing that's a portobello mushroom with spinach and feta cheese and some other things in there that was just, it's really beautiful, really savory. So, the mushroom component to me works with a Bordeaux, certainly, but probably more a Saint-Emilion because it's softer. So I wouldn't, do something that would be left bank. I'd probably typically do something that's more right bank with something like that.
So if I was going to back up a little, because first tell me what are the rules you follow, because it sounds like you played a little bit with that. So maybe you don't always follow rules because surprises can happen.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, look, there's always kind of standard rules, especially when you're in the tasting room where you have, club members that are asking you, God, I'm doing this tonight, Kevin, what would you do with it? And so there's kind of the standard rules, our lighter wines will typically be, I'll tell people, fish chicken to pork, if we're kind of talking kind of a meat driven meal. And as we go up the ladder with our wines, you'll typically kind of go, we got our pas de deux, which is a Grenache base with Syrah wine. It'll tend to be maybe more red sauce, maybe eggplant parmesan, to maybe even chicken with like a prosciutto wrap, or up to pork tenderloins. By the way, I just had some leftover pork tenderloins that my wife made last night for lunch. That would be awesome with that. And so you might kind of go into the beef, but then as you kind of move up, Syrah base will tend to want to be maybe more game. It'll want to be a little bit more beef because it's Syrah with Grenache and Mourvedre, but typically half Syrah. And as we kind of go up, I have a cab-based blend, as you mentioned, actually two of them, one heavier than the other. I have a Petite Sirah blend. So we'll kind of get more into the kind of the game, the beef, the fattier beef, or, maybe, mushroom-based kinds of meals, something like that.
So you're kind of going from lighter style wines to lighter style foods, and it's more in weight that you're matching.
Yes, but it could also be lighter wines, but it's really a function of what's the sauces or what is that's accompanying that. But it's, we all have this kind of vocabulary in our brain about what you pair with what, and a lot of it is 40 years of consumption of wine. It's just kind of instinctive. Practice, yeah. People ask, how do you learn all this? Well, I drink a lot. But there are, I do break the rules. Like, God, this could work. Like a good example is, this isn't really breaking a rule, but a lot of people are surprised, for example, is Syrah and Turkey is an amazing combo. Or Syrah and Riesling is a great combo. Well, a lot of wine aficionados will probably know this, or maybe they don't, but sometimes it's good to experiment, kind of go outside of the box and say, hey, will this work or will it not work? If there's a spice element, do I want to have a little bit more kind of fruit forward wine to kind of offset that, which is maybe a rule, but you can kind of tweak those sometimes and kind of come up with some nice surprises.
That's right.
Yeah.
You've got to try different things and test it out and see what works, and after 40 years of experience, you too will be like Kevin. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure of tasting kukkula wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Oh, gosh. Is this the kukkula plug?
The whole thing is a kukkula plug.
Yeah. Look at our tagline clearly is we're organic, dry farmers, Rhone-centric, make blends. That's what turns me on. We are low interventionists. We are very kind of terroir-driven, acid-driven, food-driven in what we do. And if that's kind of your hot button, you got to come and see what we do. We make typically 8 reds in a year. 8 red wines, not all necessarily that in that year, 6, 7, 8, depending on the vintage. And a lot of our wines are allocated. So if you're curious about kukkula, you have to come to us direct.
So if space aliens were to land on your property right now after they wind through the roads and find their way all the way up here, and they're up here on your hill, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with to say, this is kukkula?
Oh, you walked into one that I won't give you an answer on. So the question I get in the tasting room often is, which is your favorite wine?
No, this is not what your favorite wine is.
Okay, so what?
Because I'm not saying what's your best wine, your favorite wine, but which is the wine you would say to someone if the space aliens walk in and they're handed the first wine they're going to try. Maybe they're going to try more after. Maybe they only have time for one.
That's a variation on the question, isn't it? I mean, so I'll push back a little. So all of my wines are my babies.
Sure.
I love them all, and so if I were to choose for myself or for you as a guest or a space alien as a guest, it's maybe what's my mood and maybe what's the food.
So what's your mood right now?
My mood is it's early in the day, so probably Otto, which is our Counoise based blend.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, see? Got an answer. There's a time and a place for every wine, of course, but sometimes, you might want to start out with a wine that's your lighter style or maybe you want to give them the biggest wine you got, Don't have to pick favorites. They can all be your babies. So, we're sitting here, your tasting room is in the middle of one of your vineyards. Vineyards are on the back hill right behind me, and you have been here, you bought this property how many years ago?
I should know this. We bought this property at least 20 years ago. We moved up here December 2004, so that would be 20 years ago. 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
And was this an existing vineyard already, or did you plant it?
No. I'm sorry, I'm putting my phone off so you don't hear all these bings. I apologize. We bought this 80-acre parcel again in, we closed escrow the 1st of December 2004. It was 75 acres of walnut trees. It was a 1-acre sliver of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is why I experimented with Cab, even though I'm focused on Rhones. And I joked that it was 3 acres of rusted tractor truck parts, pipes and lumber, and it took me a year plus, what do we call those? The trucks pull the trailers, this massive trailer, and it was insanity, but kind of the farming vernacular on the property. Just real quick summary, 2006, January, started planting our first vines, ultimately planted 50 acres of vines across 2 properties, not just this, 30 acres of which were on this property, 8 acres of olives. We built our home, we built this winery. So everything you see here today, except for the remaining 22 acres of walnuts, all the infrastructure we built over the last 20 years.
Wow, so you planted the vines. You've been organic since the start. This was untouched land in that way, so it's never been touched by chemicals or anything like that. So that's a really beautiful thing. And I'm curious, as you've watched your vineyard grow up, we know every vintage tells a different story. We know there's variation, maybe less in a region like this, but what have you noticed over the years as you've watched your babies grow up?
Oh gosh, I could talk to you all day about that.
The succinct answer.
Well, I guess just the one thing I've realized already many years ago, and I still see is, and some of this might have to do with just kind of the natural propensities of this soil, this property to do what it does. But what I think I've noticed is, especially as it relates to what type of vegetative growth we get in the winter, the abundance of the variety of. It seems like it gets more and more intense over time, which I think maybe speaks, hopefully, to being a good steward of the land. We don't fertilize our property. We just rely 100% on the native product that it produces. We disc all that material back in the soil. We have very vigorous plants, almost too vigorous. Again, is that property or is that as a result of our organic dry farming practices?
And age, and also age.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, age, because of the whole red blotch we've dealt with, we've torn everything out and we restarted. And so the age isn't really part of the equation. The last of our oldest vines we just tore out 2-3 months ago.
Wow.
So that was really heartbreaking to do that. But you have to. I mean, you got to make amazing wines. You have to do what you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any good luck rituals that you do at the beginning of harvest? Have you established any with your vineyard?
No.
No.
Hard work.
No time for rituals.
So one of the wines that and we may or may not talk about the wines, but one of the wines that are in front of you today is called Sisu, and Sisu is the word in the Finnish culture that defines Finns. It's a word of pride in the Finnish culture. It means patience, perseverance, and stamina. There's actually a whole bunch of things it means. It's a powerful word. Basically, stick-to-itiveness, never quit. My wife loves to say it means stubborn, and so I guess my attitude, the way I grew up, the culture of Finns is keep your head down, work hard, and good things happen. So that's my good luck.
That's your good luck. Are there any sort of signs or omens that you look for, that you capture, that are going to tell you what harvest is going to be, what kind of vintage you're going to get?
Oh, no. I can reflect on 2012 as an example. It was actually the first year of kind of that, when we really kind of started getting this series of drought years, year after year. I think we had like 5 years in a row right there, 4 anyway. It turns out that if you had asked me to kind of foretell what the vintage was like,
you never could have.
I would have thought, given the drought year, that we would have had a lighter yield. We would have had, maybe a little more terroir-driven wines, less kind of fruit-driven wines. It turned out to be almost the exact opposite. It was one of the most bountiful yields I've ever had, on a per ton basis, on a per acre basis. And the fruits were the fruit was really kind of the wines were very fruit forward, big wines. So you never know. 11 vintage was one of the most horrendous growing vintages we ever experienced, and I mean, to the point that we had hail, we had snow. I lost 70% of my branches of my Grenache because of extreme winds. Because it rained so late, I just finally threw in the towel. I said screw it on trying to get the weeds under control. So we were probably wading through 2 feet thick of weeds during harvest. It was I just thought, okay, we're screwed. And although critics sort of panned the vintage, I think in retrospect 11 was an amazing vintage. So I've learned after a number of years of not being able to read the tea leaves that never read into the vintage until everything's done.
So this is going to be a little kind of, you're a winemaker now, you're a vineyard owner, you planted these vines. You come from a financial background, having worked in finance for many years, so this may seem a little silly to you, but I guess, you survived the space alien question. Slow, sort of. But, you planted these vines, you've watched them grow up, you've had to pull them out and replant. And I'm curious, when you walk through the vines, do you talk to your vines? Do you have a conversation with them? Is there any kind of communication that goes on, of encouragement, of disappointment, of...
So I don't know that I ever really have a conversation with the vines, but I do actually have an audible conversation with myself. I do talk to myself, and every once in a while I think people are going to think I'm crazy. I do find myself, certainly because I'm either evaluating or working in the vineyard a lot, but I think of this more in the context of maybe when the day is done, and if I want to kind of, unwind, I'll either walk into the vineyard or I'll sit, on one of our stone walls overlooking the vineyard and kind of maybe assess things and maybe appreciate things. So I don't know that I really talk to my plants.
Do you talk to your wines when they go into barrel?
Oh, again, I talk to myself a lot, so I suppose I'm talking to my wines. I do talk a lot to myself, you know. So if you ever walk in on me and I'm talking, there's not necessarily somebody in the room.
So obviously wine was not something that you had planned to do as an adult. And I'm curious, when you were a little boy, what did you want to do? What did you want to be?
Gosh, there was lots of things I wanted to be. So first of all, I'm a super visual guy. I've always been over the top interested in photography, to the point that when I was a young guy, I would actually take a lot of photographs, develop all my negatives, make prints, mostly black and white, did a little bit of what's called Cibachrome, slide kind of processing stuff. Took some art photography class. So I wanted to be an art photographer. I wanted to be a cinematographer. I wanted to be an architect, because you see all these things are kind of very visually driven things.
Yeah.
But I will say that I don't think I ever thought I would be a farmer, but I had an innate interest in farming. And when I was a kid, my father from Finland to Canada, and the family from Canada to the United States, and we lived in the San Fernando Valley, had a little tract house in North Hollywood, and my parents had a typical kind of 50 by 150 foot deep yard, and they had plum trees and orange trees and apricot trees and lemon trees in there that they actually were there. I don't think they ever planted those. But I was innately so interested in this stuff that I planted this huge, maybe the size of this room easily, vegetable garden when I was probably 9 or 10, and I maintained it pretty well till I left the house. I was really into gardening in general. I had these amazing flower gardens, and almost to the point of embarrassment when I was in my late teens. My mom would brag about my flower gardens. I'd say, "Hey, Mom, you can't do that. That's not cool for a 16-year-old boy." So I guess, even though I didn't necessarily articulate or really think about this in a serious way, I've always been innately drawn to farming. So I guess I became a farmer.
And when you're not working, not in the vineyard anymore.
That's never.
Never. How do you spend your free time? Do you still cycle?
Oh, okay. So no, I do not cycle. I have an amazing bike. Well, it's a 40-year-old bike that it's a hand-built bike. And every once in a while I do get on and ride. Unfortunately, I don't. And that's probably because of my work schedule. I'm usually 4 o'clock in the morning up and I'm working, and I pretty well work till sunset. So I'm a workaholic. Somebody once said to me that there's workaholics and then there's Kevin. So that's kind of me. But that said, I do break loose. As we discussed, I'm Canadian born. Interestingly enough, in a Finnish enclave in Northern Ontario, Canada, and I have a house on a lake 300 miles north of Toronto, so it's in Northern Canada. You can't drive to it, you take a boat to it. It's completely isolated. I'm a big fisherman, so I do a lot of fishing there. In fact, I was just there for 2 weeks doing work on my house there. I got back 2 weeks ago, but in 2 weeks we're going back for 6 weeks, and there's no internet, there's no email. The only way to talk to me is to come by boat to the house, and I shut it down. That's my time to shut down.
So in your free time, you just have to turn it off.
I have to turn it off, yeah. I don't know how to do it otherwise, yeah.
Well, I think it's funny that you were a big bike rider and you don't do that anymore, but, and it was the wine part that stuck.
Well, it's funny because I tell people that I'm a big skier, cyclist, and runner. I do none of them anymore, unfortunately, because there's no time.
So, living in the vineyard, you said you have a lot of sparkling wines, you don't open those very often, and I'm curious, if you were planning a romantic evening for you and your wife, what sort of wines do get opened to set the mood of romanticism?
Well, I would say it's kind of food driven again. I mean, hopefully that creates the mood for something romantic once in a while, if you're not too exhausted. It is so food driven. My wife is an amazing cook, and if you're a guest at our house for dinner, I think you'd be blown away. People tell me all the time, "You are the luckiest guy on earth, Kevin," and I am. It's amazing. So my wife has an amazing repertoire of food that she makes, and she's super creative. Our kids are adults and they're gone now. The youngest has been gone now for over 2 years. And so she's got, and I think probably somewhat driven even by COVID, COVID, post-COVID, and post-kids, she's gotten even more creative, and almost every night there's a different entree that she's presenting. And so we always have a bottle. There's a rare night that we don't have a bottle of wine. So that wine is going to be decided based on what the food is, but it runs the gamut. Again, California wines, certainly kukkula wines, Central Coast wines, Northern California wines, not so much Napa, maybe more Sonoma. Heavily focused in areas like the Willamette. I love Pinots. To me, Willamette is more kind of like the Bourgogne region, and so I'm more driven by that than I am by wonderful wines that come out like Santa Rita and places like that. But they're not, to me, kind of more in the vein of what I think of Pinots. But I love Bourgogne. I love Rhone in France. I love Bordeaux, Spain.
So you're these two empty nesters with a wife that cooks really well, opening wine every night. It must be a very romantic house.
No, maybe I should just leave it there and say, yes, you're right. It's an amazing experience. The reality probably, though, is I'm so damn exhausted. We eat dinner, I drink wine, and she puts on a movie and I fall asleep. Sorry, guys.
So I'm curious, when you look back at your career, and this can include also working in the financial sector, but what would you say is one of the best pieces of advice you ever received?
That's easy. My dad had always told me, my father was, a working class Finnish guy. He grew up during World War II, during the period that the Soviets had invaded Finland, and he, when he was in his 20s, jumped on a ship with his brother, one of his 4 siblings, and moved to Canada. And his ultimate mission was to come to the United States, the land of opportunity. And so my dad was driven by money, by wealth. He never achieved that wealth, but it was always about the level of your happiness is directly correlated to how much money you make. And I can't argue with that. I've been pretty successful in my life, and clearly money has afforded me the ability to do things that other people wouldn't. But I started to, like I said, fall in love with wines in my 20s, and by the time I was in my 30s, I was actually making, I didn't tell you this, I actually planted a vineyard in Topanga Canyon. Oh, wow. I actually got legally bonded as a winery. I made a whopping 65 cases a year there. I planted Syrah with a touch of Grenache, a touch of Cinsault, and a touch of Grosso Sangiovese, because I love Brunellos, and to this day I still love Brunellos. I never made any wine because it just didn't work out there, but I made essentially a Syrah or a Syrah kind of blend every year for 5 years there.
If only your wife knew what the future held at that moment.
She knew. My wife will tell people that Kevin doesn't understand the meaning of a small hobby. But the point I was going to make was every year we would have a release party in June-ish of our wines, and our house sat up high in the Santa Monica Mountains and actually looked out of the canyon, and you could see Catalina in the distance if you have a perspective of Los Angeles, the west side. And it was this one night in particular which maybe kind of illustrates kind of my attitude about maybe what makes happy, what drives people in life, or what maybe the message is, especially the younger people, how they should lead their lives, we were all kind of buzzed. It was the end of a wonderful evening. The sun was setting, and one of my guests said something to me, "God, this is such a beautiful evening." And I was probably a little bit buzzed, I'm sure, at that point. And I said, I've made a whole lot of money in the wine, in the money management world that I never thought I would make. And on some level, I'm kind of miserable. And I said, I do nothing but throw money down the drain in this wine project. That's nothing compared to, by the way, what I do here. So in retrospect, I should have stuck with it. But the point was, yet I completely dig it. And so the question is, what's wrong with me? And so I guess the short answer to your question is, when young people ask me about coming into this business, it isn't so much this business. Your question is a broader question, but I think it relates to the question, which is, they're wanting to get in the wine business. And my answer is, you damn well better love it, because it's a lot of work. It's a very hard business, especially in this kind of an environment. But the broader thing, this is what I told my kids, figure out what turns you on, and then figure out how to make money doing what turns you on. Mm-hmm. Now I did it the reverse, which maybe in retrospect is good. I did quite well in my career, and I used that wealth that I acquired to pursue that, which is always things that have always turned me on. I've always had extracurricular activities. I'm not one of those guys who, I just retired from my financial world a little over a month ago, and this is my retirement gig. I'm working 80 to 100 hour weeks. So I've retired to 80 to 100 hour weeks. But the point is, I think you'll love the career, your path in life if you're turned on by what you're doing.
So when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Easy, kids.
No, I said your career. Because I know everyone always answers their kids.
So the proudest achievement in my career.
To date. And it could be from any part of your career, and I'm sure there will be lots of those moments, but...
So, when you say career, maybe you're asking about the money management world.
No, I'm asking about anything but not your kids, work life. It could be wine, it could be...
Okay. It isn't... I think my proudest achievement is that I pursued my dream.
See? Not the money world.
Yeah. No, not well, it's consistent with what I just said earlier, right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you said to me that every night in your house you have a bottle of wine. It's very rare not to have wine on the table. So I'm curious if you can complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
Oh my God. A table without wine is like a day without food, I guess.
Non-existent in your world.
It's non-existent. Wine is a legitimate component of your meal.
I fully agree with that. Fully agree.
Yeah.
So we're sitting at a long table. You do dinners all the time. Your wife cooks a great meal. You pull out kukkula wines. You have them on the table, and there's an empty seat next to you. Who from any walk of life, living or deceased, would you like to be sitting in that seat sharing a bottle of kukkula wines?
Oh my God, there's so many people I would love to sit. This is kind of the political world. I would have always loved to have met Jimmy Carter. That has nothing to do with maybe you expected me to say, highly regarded winemaker. There's such a high list of people. And now that you put me on the spot, I can't. I mean, Jimmy Carter comes up first and foremost, maybe because he's been in the news lately and is at the end of his life cycle here. I'm always fascinated. This is a generic answer, but I'm always fascinated by people who have lived life intensely. So there's a litany of people in the political world, in the historical world, and certainly in the wine world. And you got me on the spot, and I can't think of it. As soon as you walk out the door, Allison, I'm gonna go, oh, what an idiot! I should have said blank.
Well, you said Jimmy Carter. You got a name out there,
there you go.
And that makes sense. And we'll save a few extra seats at the table, so when you fill it in, you can do that.
Yeah, before you hang up here, I'll oh, I got it.
So we're getting to the end. We're gonna play our little game, but I do have a question for you first. We're here in a hot area. You've got nice diurnal shifts. You're dry farming. You're doing everything as with the lowest of intervention possible. We know that climate change is definitely something to grapple with. So I'm curious. You think that people will be doing this in 300 years?
Growing vines, making wine? Mm-hmm. Oh, of course they will. We'll adapt. I mean, the thing about certainly the vineyard world, and this is true, I'm sure with other plants, is how science has evolved to make plants, in this case, plants producing an edible component, adaptable. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is people have to get their heads in the game on what we're doing to destroy this planet.
Yeah. So if unfortunately you were being sent off to a deserted island at this point, temperature not being an issue, refrigeration not being an issue, which 3 wines would you want to take with you?
Of kukkula?
Or of anything one?
Oh, Christ, that's a hard one. Okay, I don't know. I would do something like... one of my favorite wines is La Chapelle from the Rhone region. There's so many. I don't know even where to begin. Pichon Lalonde from Bordeaux. Mm-hmm. Should I throw a kukkula in there?
Sure.
Well, no, I won't.
Which one?
That's the hard one. I can't pick one. It's my mood. So I'll pick something else. Rhone. Oh my gosh. it would have to be one of the Rhones, southern Rhones, and what the hell, I'll throw in Bocastel.
Okay. I like how you're consistent, though, and you still will not pick a wine.
Yes.
So that's going to bring me to our fun question of pairing wine with music, because now I'm going to make you, single out a few of your wines and tell me what sort of genre, music, musician, song, kind of reminds you of the wine. So we're going to start with your blue label wine, which is the Counoise, the Counoise based wine that is named after your dad, right?
Yep. Yeah. You told me you were going to do this, and now
this is the only thing I warned you about.
It's like, how the heck am I going to answer this? It's funny because I got some really eclectic taste in music. I love music, but when you put me on the spot with that kind of stuff, maybe it's because I don't really listen to music as much as I used to. My audio system isn't up to date, shall we say? I would say mood-wise, certainly, Counoise is very fruit-driven, big volume, spicy. I suggested earlier salsa, a fun Latin tune would be wonderful with that wine.
Perfect. Okay, next up we have Sisu, which is the very impactful Finnish word you were talking about. And this is, tell me a little bit about the grapes in this.
Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre. Actually, this vintage that you have in front of you is a 46% Syrah, 30% Mourvedre, and 20% Grenache. It's always Syrah dominant, and could be typically more likely a quarter each of Grenache and Mourvedre in that zone. Oh gosh, this is where it gets tough. It's a pretty serious wine. It would have to be something more classical music, generically Baroque music, maybe like a Vivaldi's Four Seasons or something like that. I don't know.
See that?
Yeah.
I'm sipping the wine. I get that. It's got a little floral, a little fruit, a little spice. It's kind of, it's got the seasons and the flavors.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, one more. You're almost there. One more. We're going to do the Kukkula Noir.
Yeah.
And this is?
Kukkula Noir. This vintage is 85 Syrah, 15 Petite, so it's dark. It's a pretty intense wine. Even though it's got Petite in it, to me, it's kind of a nod to the northern Rhone. It has this more kind of terroir-driven kind of sense that you get from kind of the northern Rhones. Oh gosh, that's hard. I'm trying to think of something a little bit more kind of modern. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's cerebral. Pink Floyd comes to mind because Pink Floyd's one of my favorite all-time bands.
Well, there you go.
It's a very cerebral band and a very cerebral wine, I'd say.
There you go. I won't put any more pressure on, but you are good at describing your wine, so, you did well. You did well. Kevin, you're off the spot. You have one more question to answer, and that is, it's a two-parter. First is, what wine region in the world is at the top of your bucket list to visit?
Oh, that's easy. I'm not so sure. Let's just do country first. Believe it or not, I love Spanish wines. I have a number of Spanish wines in my cellar. I have never been to Spain. It just hasn't hit my. It's hit my list, but it never has been high enough, and whatever circumstances have kept me from going there. It's going to happen in the next year for sure. I've said it to my wife. Rioja, certainly front and center, is a place that, and Priorat certainly. Those two are my favorite zones. So, in Spain.
Okay. And for our listeners, if they want to come visit you at Kukkula, how can they find you? Where can they find you? Tell us.
Yeah. So again, we're. Although we do have some exposure in some stores and restaurants in the Central Coast in Southern California, we are not distributed, and therefore the easiest way is either come and visit us here on Chimney Rock on the west side of Paso, or go to kukkulawine.com. That's Kukkula wine.com. Plugging myself here. Those are the two best ways to see our wines.
That's great. And the tasting room is in the vineyard. It is enclosed and air conditioned, so on a hot day you can stay nice and cool. But
it's cozy in the middle of the vineyard.
Yes, it's got windows all around. You can look down at the cellar, you can look out at the vineyard, and taste the wines of Kukkula. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack, and let's go take a walk in the vineyard.
Do it. Dippis, the Finns would say. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.